Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And yesterday we started talking about how this idea of the king's robes being placed on Mordecai when he gets to go on this parade, this triumph, is very reminiscent. It's very echoey of the biblical theme of the righteousness of God being placed upon people. And there's just so much in the Bible about it that it turned out to be a 2-day conversation. So we're just going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. I'm going to have Jeff play some cool music, something that's real fun, and then we will get after it. All right, here we go. The Apostle Paul famously likens spiritual maturity to putting on the armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6. And in particular, he uses this language in verse 14. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. It's a metaphor. You don't get an actual belt. With the breastplate of righteousness in place. It's a breastplate, so it's a little bit of an adaptation of this long-standing biblical metaphor of being clothed in righteousness. But it goes in the same place that a robe does. I mean, it covers the upper body. It's just that here there's this idea of spiritual warfare and girding one for opposing the spiritual forces of evil that Paul's talking about here in Ephesians 6. Even Matthew 23, dang it, I did this yesterday. I couldn't remember exactly where it is. I think it's Matthew 23 where you get the parable. Nope, it is not. Hang on. Matthew 22, it is where you get Jesus telling the parable about that banquet and everybody being clothed by the host of the wedding banquet and receiving like the wedding garments to wear, and somebody trying to get in there and being like, oh, I didn't really want to wear that. I don't want there to be a dress code anymore. I'm going to show up like this. Culturally, it doesn't make a ton of sense in isolation, but when you learn a little bit about ancient culture and when you learn a little bit about this through-line metaphor that we see throughout the Bible, that parable in Matthew 22 makes more sense because the guests are being clothed with clothing that demonstrates their acceptedness and their inclusion in this event, in the family, in the roster of guests. They're being given that by the host of the wedding banquet, and the person who doesn't accept it, who rejects the host's offer of that gift of that robe, that attire for the wedding, that person is viewed as the bad guy who doesn't get it. The Apostle Paul, once again, in Romans 13. Oh, I did pretty well flipping over there. That one was fast. Romans 13, verse 14. The verse before it says a bunch of destructive stuff that you should avoid. And then verse 14 says, rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the sinful nature. Now, biblical theology suggests that it is not presumptuous to clothe oneself with Jesus Christ or with his righteousness because it's been freely offered through the work of Christ on the cross and through the resurrection. Galatians 3 uses the same kind of language. That's from the Apostle Paul again. For as many of you were baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. Colossians 3 uses the same kind of language. Go eat popcorn. Verse 10, almost there. Here it is, verse 9. Don't lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices. So again, ditching the old dirty clothes, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. And he goes on to even talk about how this new clothing, being robed in the righteousness of God, is something that breaks down barriers, even the kind of barriers that are eating our lunch right now as we're trying to be a global society and an internet-linked global society, but it's not going very well, and we're wanting to revert to old tribal ways of bickering and fighting. Paul chases this idea of anybody who's in Christ being robed with the righteousness of Christ, putting on this new clothing. He chases that concept with indicating that there's something incredibly unifying about this, and that all being clothed in this way, metaphorically, changes the way you see the other people in your world and in your circle. And he says this, verse 11, here there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised. That was the symbolism of being either Jewish or not Jewish, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. There's emotion in my voice because I'm getting worked up because I absolutely love that vision. That right there in Colossians 3 is what we can have. That's crazy because, I mean, whether you think there's a God, whatever you believe politically, whatever, at least in a spoken sense, what is being described right there is what everybody at least says they want. But I think there's tremendous political power and money to be gained by saying we want those things and then never doing anything to actually realize it. And so I think everyone, if we're really honest, feels this sort of deep down despair that this optimism and this possibility of having things that are broken made right has been kind of bastardized and cheapened and commodified for money and political power. I'm not accusing any singular party of this. I'm accusing everybody who plays the game of playing this stupid game. But this description of what happens when people are clothed in the righteousness of God, it's beautiful. It's a vision of how things could be that theoretically is what we all want. And I think if you strip away all of the stupid news and stupid politics and stupid manipulation that we undergo all the time, all the stuff that is meant to divide us and make us hate each other, if you strip all of that away and just listen to those words as they're laid out right there, it's balm to the soul. It's life-giving. There's hope in this that you just absolutely don't get from anything in culture. There's not like a next piece of legislation that's going to come down the line and make it so that everybody's clothing themselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with each other and forgiving whatever grievances they might have against one another, and being one and unified, still aware of the fact that we're different from different backgrounds, but this other thing transcends all of that and overcomes those barriers. Nothing is coming down the pike that is going to do that. There is no new product. There is no new app on your phone. There is no news story coming down the pike. Breaking news, everything's fine now. Oh, you no longer need to watch the news. We all quit. We're going to go become farmers and live a quiet life out in the fields. Thanks. It's been a real honor serving you, but now everything's great. It's fine. We're all clothed in righteousness. That's not coming. All of the people who make the reality that we live in that is rife with problems are massively financially and ego incentivized to make sure that lasts as long as possible. The way out, the thing that solves all of that has got to come from a different source. It's got to come from beyond. And there's got to be some sort of fundamental transformative element that happens not through some central force of the state or market manipulation. It has to be from beyond what is natural. It has to be bestowed upon humanity, bestowed upon the individual by the only being that is actually right and the only being that actually has good motives. So why have we hung on this parade thing for so long in the book of Esther? Why did I just take 2 more days on that? Well, because at the very, very least, the narrative imagery of the king's robe being placed on this guy wearing sackcloth, filthy clothing, sitting outside the gates of the king, and then suddenly having the king's vouch upon him and suddenly riding upon the king's horse, at the very least, that imagery is an echo of this absolutely crucial theme of the entire Bible as it pertains to redemption and the righteousness of God imparted to broken people. At the very least, it echoes of that. At the very most, this is absolutely intentional. Look, whoever wrote the book of Esther was keenly aware of the book of Isaiah. They had a real good sense of what other prophets like Zechariah were writing about as well. And true, I can't prove it in the same way that I can prove something with science, but I am profoundly convinced that this imagery is not an accident and that it is meant to nudge, to prompt, to push, to spark the imagination, to remind gently through the power of story. It's meant to do those things for the reader to prompt them toward this central notion of redemption, the idea of being robed in the righteousness of God, clothed in the righteousness of God, of having the fortunes of the individual reversed from being an outsider, even an enemy of God, to being someone who's honored like a child of God, the Son of God, robed in the righteousness of the King. And look, straight up, final thought here. I am not always super overt about this because it just doesn't always come up. I mean, we're just working through the text. We're trying to understand it. But again, as we've talked about so much, I know that this is not a uniform group that we're hanging out with together here. I know that some of you have been around Jesus and Christianity and the Bible for a super long time, and you would say straight up, I think the Bible's from God, and I am a follower of Jesus. I know there are others of you who would say, I'd like to believe, but I don't. And so I'm just going to be around the Bible because I want to learn about it. I know there are others of you who would say, I just don't think there's a God. I don't think God's behind it, but I understand the importance of this book, and I understand its importance to other people in my life. And I think it's really interesting, and I want to be here. Awesome. All of that is awesome. And acknowledging that, just from time to time, I feel like I need to really turn over my cards and spell it out. I never want to manipulate to these ends, but straight up, if you aren't a Christian, I want you to be. If you are not clothed in the righteousness of Christ, I want you to be. If you're not a follower of Christ, I want you to be. And I don't need to sell it or turn a bunch of screws to try to get that to happen on my terms or whatever. But no, straight up, I don't know if anybody has ever invited you before. And if that's the case, and you're just kind of waiting for somebody to be like, hey, you're welcome. You're totally invited to be a part of the family of faith. Maybe nobody's ever said that. So let this count. Hey, I would love it if you became a Christian and you are completely invited to this family of faith, even if it seems like it's for other people and not you. If you feel like an outsider to it, join the club. We're all outsiders to this. That's what the Bible teaches, that all of us were opposed to the things of God. All of us need to be clothed in the righteousness of God. All of us need to put on Christ. So it's not like you got this insider outsider thing anyway. It's all just kind of a matter of where you're at in the journey and the process of it. And I just wanted you to know that you were invited. There. That's my thing. I'm going to wrap it up right there. Thanks for spending a couple days with me thinking about this really important Bible theme, and for enduring me getting all excited and worked up about it, because I think it's rad. Cool. Moving ahead in the story tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.